The storm had cleared over Fort Carson's eastern ranges, leaving behind a crisp autumn morning. Sunlight gleamed off the damp metal surfaces of the M1A2 Abrams tanks, arranged in perfect formation across the training grounds. Captain Thomas Iron Tom Mitchell stood alone in the tactical planning room, his weathered hands braced against the table edge as he studied the topographical model of Ridgewood Valley. The miniature landscape represented 50 square miles of the most challenging tank terrain the Army could devise. Valleys with steep inclines, narrow passes, ridges perfect for ambush positions. Tom ran his fingers through his silver-gray hair, feeling every one of his 58 years in the stiffness of his shoulders. 28 years in the Army, 17 commanding tanks across 3 continents. He should have been long retired, enjoying fishing at his cabin in Montana. Instead, here he was, about to lead one final mission that could determine the future of American armored warfare. His reflection in the polished surface of the table revealed a face lined by desert sun and marked by years of command decisions. Eyes that had seen the burning oil fields of Kuwait now studied artificial terrain with the same intensity. The same eyes that had watched young men die now considered how to train the next generation to survive. A photograph lay beside the terrain model. Tom picked it up, allowing himself a moment of remembrance. Desert Storm, 1991. His crew posed proudly atop their Abrams, faces blackened with oil and sand but grinning with the confidence of victors. Sergeant Hayes with his arm around Corporal Jefferson. Lieutenant Cooper flashing a thumbs up. Tom himself standing tall, both legs still firmly planted on the tank's hull. The door opened behind him, breaking his reverie. Brigadier General Williams entered with a younger officer following a step behind. "Captain Mitchell," Williams said, using Tom's former rank out of old habit. "Still getting reacquainted with the uniform?" Tom straightened, the familiar weight of responsibility settling back onto his shoulders. "The uniform remembers me better than I remember it, sir." Williams nodded toward the terrain model. "What do you think of Ridgewood?" "Whoever designed it either hates tanks or loves teaching hard lessons," Tom replied. "Probably both. That's why we need you, Tom. No one knows tanks like you do." Williams gestured to the officer beside him. "This is Major Foster, heading up our Technology Integration Division. He'll be running the other training group." Major William Foster stepped forward, crisp and polished in his uniform. His handshake was firm but brief, his smile professional but not reaching his eyes. At 45, Foster was the epitome of the new Army, tech-savvy, data-driven, and thoroughly modern. "Captain Mitchell, your reputation precedes you," Foster said. "Your Desert Storm tactics are still taught at the academy." "Along with what not to do, I imagine," Tom replied with a hint of self-deprecation. Foster's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Times change. Technology changes. The fundamentals of tank warfare are evolving. Men in metal boxes fighting other men in metal boxes," Tom said. "The technology changes. The fundamentals are eternal." Williams cleared his throat, sensing the brewing philosophical divide. "Gentlemen, save it for the competition. Mitchell, your first briefing with your team is at 0900. I expect you'll want to review their files beforehand." After they departed, Tom turned back to the model, but his mind was elsewhere. Not on the terrain before him, but on the burning wreckage of his tank in the Iraqi desert. The explosion that took his right leg below the knee. The faces of the men he couldn't save. The weight of command decisions that would never leave him, even with a prosthetic leg hidden beneath his uniform trousers. He hadn't told anyone about the nightmares that still came 14 years later. About waking up in the middle of the night feeling phantom pain, where flesh and bone no longer existed. About hearing the screams of his gunner trapped in the burning tank. Some burdens a commander carried alone. Tom gathered the personnel files and headed to his quarters to prepare. His slight limp, nearly imperceptible after years of adaptation, was the only visible sign of what the war had taken from him. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parade ground as Tom made his way to the administrative building. Each step was measured, deliberate, the way he trained himself to walk after rehabilitation, never showing weakness, never revealing pain, the essence of command. The hallway outside Conference Room B held a familiar figure. Colonel Robert Hayes stood gazing out the window, hands clasped behind his back. At 60, Hayes was still ramrod straight, but the years had added silver to his temples and deeper lines around his eyes. When he turned at Tom's approach, genuine warmth replaced the military stoicism. "Tom Mitchell," Hayes said, extending his hand, "the legend himself." They clasped hands, then embraced briefly in the manner of old soldiers who had faced death together. Bobby Hayes, Tom replied. Last I heard you were pushing papers at the Pentagon. Hayes chuckled. I was, until this project came along. His expression sobered. Walk with me a minute before we go in. They moved down the hallway together, two veterans with nearly 60 years of combined service between them. This program is my last hurrah, Tom, Hayes said quietly. Iron Forge is going to revolutionize how we train tank commanders. Or at least that's what it's supposed to do. Tom noted the strain in his old friend's voice. What aren't you telling me? Hayes stopped, glancing around to ensure they were alone. I've got stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm lucky. The news hit Tom like a physical blow. Hayes had been with him since Desert Storm, had pulled him from the burning wreckage of his tank, had visited him every week during rehabilitation. Jesus, Bobby, Tom managed. Does Williams know? Just the medical staff and you. I want to finish this project, Tom. It's going to be my legacy. Hayes gripped Tom's shoulder. But there's more. This program is at a crossroads. Foster and his tech wizards want to move toward autonomous systems, AI-assisted targeting, removing the human element as much as possible. And you don't. I believe in technology, but I also believe in the human being inside the tank, in judgment, in experience. Hayes' grip tightened. That's why I asked for you specifically. You're a dinosaur, Tom, a magnificent, battle-tested dinosaur who understands what these machines can do and what they can't. What a human needs to do when the systems fail. Tom understood now. This wasn't just about training a new generation. This was about the future direction of armored warfare itself. You want me to prove the old ways still matter? Hayes nodded. I want you to show that all the algorithms in the world can't replace what's up here. He tapped his temple. And in here. He placed his hand over his heart. With a group of fresh recruits against Foster's cutting-edge systems. Not exactly fresh, Hayes said. You've got a mix, some veterans, some newer, all talented but lacking cohesion. Foster's got the technological edge. You've got experience. Tom thought of the personnel files he'd reviewed, of his own limitations, of what Hayes was asking. When were you going to tell me about the cancer? I wasn't. Margaret doesn't even know yet. Hayes straightened his uniform. This stays between us. I don't want sympathy. I want results. Tom nodded, processing everything. I can't promise we'll win against Foster's team. I'm not asking for promises, just your best. Hayes checked his watch. They're waiting for us. Ready to meet your team? One more thing, Tom said. Are Williams and the brass stacking the deck against us, making this a show to justify moving to Foster's approach? Hayes' silence was answer enough. Right, Tom said, squaring his shoulders. Then we'll just have to show them what humans can do that machines can't. Together, they walked into the conference room where 5 officers waited, unaware they were about to become the front line in a battle for the future of tank warfare. The 5 officers rose as Tom and Hayes entered. Tom scanned their faces, connecting them with the files he'd studied that morning. 5 different backgrounds, 5 different skill sets, 5 different reasons to be skeptical of an aging tank commander with an outdated rank and a prosthetic leg. Hayes made the introductions brief before departing, leaving Tom alone with his new team. The silence stretched as Tom walked slowly around the table, studying each of them in turn. Not as files, but as people. Sit down, he finally said, taking his place at the head of the table. I'm not one for long speeches or motivational bullshit. You all know why you're here. Project Iron Forge, Advanced Tank Commander Training. 2 teams, 1 traditional approach, that's us. 1 technological approach, that's Major Foster's group. He laid his hands flat on the table. I've read your files, now I want to hear from you. Who you are, why you're here, what you expect. Lieutenant Jennifer Reynolds spoke first. She was 35 with auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun and the alert posture of someone who had fought for every promotion. Lieutenant Reynolds, sir. Tank Tactical Officer, 4 years in Iraq. I specialize in battlefield integration of armor units with infantry support. Tom nodded. Your record is impressive, Lieutenant. Top of your class at Knox. He left unspoken what he'd noted in her file. Brilliant but inflexible, sometimes resistant to authority. Thank you, sir, Reynolds replied, her tone professional, but with an undercurrent of reservation. What's your take on the Iron Forge program? Reynolds hesitated, then answered with careful precision. I believe it represents an opportunity to modernize our training approach, to integrate new technologies with proven tactics. Tom recognized the diplomatic answer. And your thoughts on being assigned to the traditional training group rather than Foster's tech team? A flicker of something crossed her face. Disappointment, perhaps, or resentment. I go where I'm assigned, sir. Tom moved on. Sergeant Washington. Marcus Washington was a solid presence, his dark skin contrasting with the silver at his temples. At 45, he was closest to Tom's age with the weathered look of a career soldier. Tank systems specialist, sir. 15 years service, 2 tours in Iraq. I keep these beasts running when everything goes to hell. Washington's deep voice carried the confidence of someone who had proven himself repeatedly. You've seen both generations of the Abrams in combat, Tom noted. Thoughts on the evolution? Washington considered this. The technology gets better. The vulnerabilities stay the same. Engines still overheat. Targeting systems still glitch when you need them most. Difference is the newer crews don't know what to do when the computer says no. Tom nodded, appreciating the candor. That's why you're here. He turned to the youngest officer present. Lieutenant Patterson? James Patterson looked barely old enough to shave, though his file stated 28 years. His eager posture reminded Tom painfully of fresh lieutenants he'd known in Desert Storm. Young men full of academy knowledge and devoid of battlefield wisdom. Tactical communications and digital systems integration, sir. I graduated top of my class in the Advanced Armor Officer course. Combat experience? Tom asked, though he knew the answer. Limited, sir. I was deployed to Kuwait for 6 months but saw no direct engagement. Tom noted the embarrassment in Patterson's voice. Combat isn't something to seek out, Lieutenant. Consider yourself fortunate. He moved on. Master Sergeant Donnelly? Frank Donnelly had the compact build and watchful eyes of a career NCO. At 52, he was the oldest after Tom himself, with a reputation as a demanding but fair tank commander. Master Sergeant Frank Donnelly, sir. 22 years service. Gunner specialist. I've personally trained over 200 tank gunners, including some in this room. His eyes briefly flicked toward Reynolds, who stiffened slightly. Your file says you're eligible for retirement next year, Tom observed. Yes, sir. Figured I'd do one more tour of duty before buying that fishing boat. Donnelly's weathered face showed little emotion, but Tom sensed the man was evaluating him just as thoroughly as Tom was evaluating the team. Lieutenant Mendez? Tom turned to the final member. Carlos Mendez had the focused intensity of a chess player, his movements economical and precise. Tactical analyst, sir. I specialize in battlefield choreography and unit positioning. My last assignment was developing engagement scenarios for the Combat Training Center. You write the simulations, Tom clarified. Yes, sir, I create the tactical problems that tank crews need to solve. Tom completed his circuit of the table and returned to his position. Each of you brings specific expertise. Each of you has a different perspective on what makes an effective tank unit. For the next 8 weeks, you'll be training together under my command, competing against Major Foster's group. He leaned forward slightly. Foster's team will have every technological advantage, better simulators, advanced targeting systems, prototype communications gear. They'll be training to fight the wars of tomorrow. Tom paused, making eye contact with each team member. We'll be training to survive them. Reynolds frowned. With respect, sir, that sounds like we're being set up as the control group, the baseline that Foster's team is expected to outperform. Tom nodded. That's exactly what we are, Lieutenant. The question is whether we'll accept that role or whether we'll demonstrate that all the technology in the world can't replace what's up here. He tapped his temple. Sir, Patterson interjected, I believe in the human element as much as anyone, but the advancements in AI targeting and threat assessment are remarkable. The processing speed alone... Let me ask you something, Lieutenant, Tom interrupted. Your tank is moving through an urban environment. Your thermal imaging identifies a heat signature in a building. The AI tags it as an enemy combatant with an RPG. Do you fire? If the system identifies a threat with appropriate confidence levels, yes. What if it's a civilian holding a broom or a child with a stick? Can your AI tell the difference when all it sees is a human-shaped heat signature holding a long object? Patterson hesitated. The systems are continuously improving, sir. And until they're perfect, men and women will make life and death decisions based on imperfect information. Tom looked around the table. That's what we're training for. Not just how to use the technology, but when not to trust it. How to rely on your judgment, your experience, and your humanity when the situation demands it. Washington nodded approvingly. Reynolds looked skeptical. Patterson seemed conflicted. Donnelly remained inscrutable. while Mendez appeared to be analyzing Tom's words from multiple angles. "Tomorrow morning, 0600 at the tank bay," Tom said, rising. "Wear your maintenance coveralls. Your first lesson won't be in the classroom or the simulator." "What will we be doing, sir?" Reynolds asked. Tom allowed himself a small smile. "Getting your hands dirty, Lieutenant. Sometimes understanding a tank starts from the inside out." As the team filed out, Tom remained behind, reviewing his notes. He hadn't mentioned the most important detail from the briefing with Hayes. The Iron Forge program's funding and future direction would be determined by which team performed better: Foster's technological approach versus Tom's human-centered methodology. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Reynolds stood in the doorway, her posture formal. "Something on your mind, Lieutenant?" Tom asked. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Tom gestured to a chair. "Sit, and yes, always." Reynolds remained standing. "I reviewed your service record, sir. Desert Storm, Operation Iraqi Freedom. Your commendations." She hesitated. "And the incident that cost you your leg." Tom's expression remained neutral. "Is there a question, Lieutenant?" "With respect, sir, tank warfare has evolved. The threats we face now aren't the same as in your day. The Republican Guard isn't the same as insurgent forces with advanced anti-tank weapons. I'm concerned that your experience, while valuable, may not be directly applicable to current combat scenarios." Tom studied her for a moment. "You're right, Lieutenant. The battlefield changes. The weapons change. The politics change." He stood, coming around the table. "But fear doesn't change. Making decisions under fire doesn't change. The responsibility of command doesn't change." He stopped a few feet from her. "You've led tanks in combat. You know that when everything goes to hell, it's not the manual or the computer that saves lives. It's the human being making decisions." "Technology can enhance those decisions," Reynolds countered. "It can, until it fails." Tom looked her directly in the eyes. "Tell me, Lieutenant, in your combat experience, how often did everything work exactly as designed?" Reynolds held his gaze for a long moment before answering. "Never, sir. That's why we train for the worst-case scenario. Not because we expect it, but because we must be prepared for it." Tom's voice softened slightly. "I don't dismiss technology, Lieutenant. I embrace what works and prepare for when it doesn't." Reynolds nodded, processing his words. "Understood, sir." "Is there anything else?" She seemed to consider saying more, then decided against it. "No, sir. I'll see you at 0600. After she left, Tom returned to the topographical model of Ridgewood Valley. Reynolds' concerns weren't unfounded. The world had changed since he'd commanded tanks in combat. But some truths remained constant: the fog of war, the chaos of battle, the weight of decisions that determined who lived and who died. And now he carried an additional burden: Hayes's cancer, the political battle over the future of tank warfare, the responsibility of preparing these officers for a battlefield that might look nothing like the ones he had known. Tom traced the contours of the model valley with his fingertips, identifying choke points, ambush positions, defensive terrain. In his mind, he could already see the metal beasts moving through the landscape, hunting each other in the deadly game of modern warfare. His team might lack Foster's technological advantages, but they had something technology couldn't replicate: experience, judgment, the human capacity to adapt when plans went awry. Tom would need to forge those individual qualities into a cohesive whole, to create a team that could overcome technological superiority with human ingenuity. The real Battle of Ridgewood would begin tomorrow. Dawn painted the eastern sky in bands of orange and purple as Tom arrived at the tank bay. He'd been awake since 0400, reviewing maintenance protocols and preparing for the day's lesson. The massive hangar doors stood open, revealing the silhouettes of 5 M1A2 Abrams tanks in various states of maintenance. Tom moved among the sleeping giants, inspecting each one in turn. Despite advances in technology, the fundamental design remained similar to the tanks he'd commanded decades earlier. The same 120 main gun, the same basic silhouette, the same purpose: to bring overwhelming firepower to bear while protecting the crew inside. The differences were in the details: more sophisticated electronics, enhanced targeting systems, better communications, layers of improvements built upon the same foundation, like geological strata recording the evolution of warfare. Tom stopped at the last tank, reaching out to touch the cold metal of the hull. This particular Abrams had seen combat in Iraq, as evidenced by the weld repairs visible on the armor skirt. Battle scars, like the ones he carried. "Permission to approach, sir?" Tom turned to find Master Sergeant Donnelly standing at a respectful distance, dressed in maintenance coveralls as instructed. The NCO's weathered face revealed nothing, but his eyes held the assessment of one professional taking the measure of another. Granted, Sergeant, you're early. Old habits, sir. Donnelly moved closer to the tank. She's seen action. Iraq 2007, Tom confirmed. Took an IED hit but got her crew home. Donnelly nodded approvingly. They build them tough. His gaze shifted to Tom. Crews have to be tougher. The implication wasn't lost on Tom. Are you wondering if I'm tough enough for this mission, Sergeant? Not my place to wonder, sir. Donnelly's expression remained neutral. But if you're asking, I've served under officers who've never seen combat and officers who've seen too much. I'll take the latter every time. Before Tom could respond, the rest of the team began arriving. Reynolds first, precisely on time, followed by Washington. Mendez arrived moments later, with Patterson hurrying in last, slightly out of breath. Tom gathered them around the damaged tank. This is Valor, he said, patting the hull. She'll be your home for the next 8 weeks. Your classroom, your proving ground. Sir? Patterson looked confused. I thought we'd be using the new M1A2 SCPV-3 variants for the program. Major Foster's team will be, Tom confirmed. We'll be working with these veterans. More specifically, we'll be rebuilding them from the inside out. Washington grinned, understanding immediately. Reynolds frowned. Sir, with respect, we're officers, not mechanics. Wouldn't our time be better spent on tactical training? Lieutenant, what happens when an enemy round penetrates your tank's armor? Tom asked. Depends on the point of impact, sir. Crew casualties, system failures, and if that round severs the hydraulic lines to your main gun, the gun becomes inoperable, Reynolds answered promptly. Now what if you knew exactly where those lines ran, how they connected, how to bypass a damaged section in the field? Tom looked around at each team member. Understanding your tank isn't just about driving it or firing its weapons. It's about knowing its vulnerabilities, its weaknesses, how it can be killed, and how you can prevent that from happening. Washington nodded emphatically. Amen to that, sir. Tom pointed to various sections of the tank. For the next week, we will systematically disassemble and reassemble this machine. Every wire, every component, every system. You will learn this tank so thoroughly that you could repair it blindfolded in the middle of a sandstorm. Patterson looked alarmed. The entire tank, sir? That's thousands of parts. Precisely, Lieutenant. And any one of them can get you killed if it fails at the wrong moment. Tom's voice took on a harder edge. Major Foster's team will be running simulations in climate-controlled rooms. We'll be up to our elbows in grease and hydraulic fluid. They'll be learning theory. We'll be building practical knowledge. And when we meet them in the field, that difference will matter. As the team moved to their assigned tasks, Tom caught Reynolds lingering. Something on your mind, Lieutenant? Just wondering about the strategy, sir. Major Foster's team will be learning advanced targeting algorithms while we're changing oil filters. Lieutenant, have you ever had to restart a tank engine under fire? Reynolds frowned. No, sir. I have. In the middle of the Iraqi desert with enemy rounds pinging off the hull. Tom's eyes took on a distant look. The electrical system was fried, the computer was dead, my gunner was bleeding out. We got that engine started because my driver knew exactly which wires to cross and which mechanical overrides to engage. He'd taken apart and reassembled that engine a dozen times in training. That knowledge saved 4 lives that day. Recognition dawned in Reynolds' eyes. This isn't about winning the competition against Foster's team, is it? It's about preparing us for when everything fails. The most dangerous words in combat are "that can't happen," Tom said quietly. I'm training you for when it does. Hydraulic fluid dripped from the ceiling. Black grease covered every surface. The disassembled components of the Abrams power plant lay spread across 3 workbenches in organized chaos. After 12 hours of intensive labor, the team had successfully removed and dismantled the tank's massive turbine engine, transmission, and cooling system. Washington moved among the parts with the confidence of a surgeon, explaining each component's function and vulnerabilities as the team cataloged them. Patterson, initially hesitant, now asked insightful questions about failure points and field repairs. Even Reynolds had shed her skepticism, fully engaged in understanding the mechanical heart of their war machine. Tom observed from a distance, allowing Washington to lead. The sergeant's expertise was evident, as was his natural ability to teach. The team was beginning to coalesce around the shared task, individual expertise emerging and being recognized, exactly as Tom had hoped. As the team dispersed for the evening, Donnelly lingered behind, methodically cleaning tools with the precision of long habit. "Something on your mind, Sergeant?" Tom asked. Donnelly looked up from his task. "Just wondering when you're going to tell them, sir." Tom stiffened. "Tell them what?" "About the real competition." Donnelly continued cleaning, his focus on the tools. "This isn't just about training methods. It's about the future of tank warfare itself." Tom carefully controlled his expression. "What makes you say that?" 22 years in the service teaches you to read between the lines, sir." Donnelly set down the clean tool and picked up another. "Major Foster's approach represents automation, AI integration, removing the human element. Your approach represents experience, judgment, the human factor. Someone up the chain is making decisions about which direction to go." Tom considered denying it, then decided against it. Donnelly had earned honesty. "Colonel Hayes is dying, cancer. This program is his final act, trying to ensure tanks don't become drones with better armor." Donnelly absorbed this without visible reaction. "The others don't know?" "No, and they don't need to yet. I want them focused on learning, not politics." "Fair enough, sir." Donnelly rose, having finished his task. "For what it's worth, I've seen what happens when people trust computers over instinct. Usually involves body bags." "That's what I'm trying to prevent," Tom said quietly. The morning briefing was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Major Foster. He entered the tank bay with two junior officers, his expression revealing surprise at the scene before him. The Abrams was now completely disassembled, its components spread across the hangar floor in a carefully organized pattern that resembled a life-size technical diagram. Tom's team, already 3 hours into their day's work, paused as Foster approached. The contrast between the groups was stark. Foster and his officers wore pristine uniforms, while Tom's team was covered in grease and hydraulic fluid, tools in hand. "Captain Mitchell," Foster nodded in greeting, "I see you've taken a hands-on approach to the first week." Tom wiped his hands on a rag. "Major, what brings you to our humble workshop?" "Curiosity." Foster surveyed the disassembled tank. "When I heard you had your officers rebuilding engines instead of running simulations, I had to see for myself." Washington straightened from where he'd been explaining the turret hydraulics to Patterson. "Would you like a tour of the systems, Major?" Foster smiled politely. "Thank you, Sergeant, but I'm familiar with the Abrams technical specifications." "Knowing specs isn't the same as feeling the weight of a drive sprocket in your hands, sir," Washington replied evenly. Tom intervened before the exchange could become contentious. "We're focusing on mechanical systems this week. Next week, we'll move to tactical training." Foster nodded. "An unconventional approach. My team is already running advanced combat simulations with the new AI targeting systems. The results are quite promising." "I'm sure they are," Tom acknowledged. "Different methods for different objectives." Foster's gaze lingered on Reynolds, who was reassembling a targeting component with Mendez. "Lieutenant Reynolds, I believe you were initially slated for my team. How are you finding Captain Mitchell's traditional methods?" Reynolds looked up from her work, her expression professionally neutral. "Educational, sir, more hands-on than I expected." After Foster and his officers departed, an uncomfortable silence settled over the tank bay. "Reynolds," Tom said it finally, "you were originally assigned to Foster's team?" She met his gaze directly. "Yes, sir, I requested the transfer to your unit." This was news to Tom. "May I ask why?" Reynolds hesitated, glancing at her teammates before answering. "I served under officers who relied too heavily on technology in Iraq. It cost lives when that technology failed." She gestured to the disassembled tank. "This approach made more sense to me." Tom nodded, appreciating her honesty. "And the rest of you? Any regrets about not being in Foster's high-tech playground?" Donnelly snorted. "Simulations are for video gamers. Real tankers get dirty." Washington nodded agreement. Patterson looked conflicted but said nothing. Mendez spoke up unexpectedly. "I've written enough simulations to know their limitations, sir. They can only test what the programmer anticipates. Real life is messier." Tom felt a surge of pride in his team. Just days ago, they had been 5 individuals with doubts about his methods. Now they were beginning to see the value in his approach, to coalesce around a shared philosophy. "Back to work," he ordered. "We've still got a turret to reassemble before the 1500 briefing." The briefing room fell silent as Colonel Hayes entered. Despite his illness, Hayes maintained the commanding presence that had defined his career. Only Tom, knowing what to look for, could see the subtle signs of the disease's progression. The slight pallor beneath Hayes's tan, The carefully controlled movements that disguise fatigue, the almost imperceptible weight loss since their last meeting. Hayes surveyed the two teams seated on opposite sides of the conference table. Foster's officers in spotless uniforms, data tablets at the ready. Tom's team still bearing traces of their mechanical work, despite efforts to clean up, paper notes and hand-drawn diagrams before them. The division couldn't have been more symbolic. Gentlemen, lady. Hayes nodded to Reynolds, the only woman present. 1 week into Project Iron Forge. Time for a progress assessment. Foster spoke first, his presentation polished and data-rich. His team had completed over 50 virtual training exercises. The AI targeting system was showing a 12% improvement in accuracy over human gunners. The tactical simulators had run hundreds of battlefield scenarios, optimizing unit movements based on terrain and enemy disposition. In short, Colonel, Foster concluded, we're exceeding all benchmarks. By the end of the 8-week program, I believe we'll have definitively proven the superiority of the integrated technological approach. Hayes nodded noncommittally. Impressive numbers, Major. Captain Mitchell, your report? Tom stood, feeling the weight of the moment. No slides, no statistics, just the truth as he saw it. My team has disassembled and is rebuilding our Abrams from the ground up, he began. Every major system, every critical component. They're learning what works, what fails, and how to fix it when it does. Next week, we'll begin tactical training, focusing on operations in degraded conditions. When technology fails, when communications go down, when sensors are blinded. Foster interjected. With respect, Captain, modern systems have redundancies that make such catastrophic failures increasingly unlikely. And with respect, Major, Tom countered, enemies are developing increasingly sophisticated methods to create exactly those failures. EMP weapons, cyber attacks, electronic warfare. The future battlefield won't be more predictable. It will be less. Hayes raised a hand, forestalling further debate. Both approaches have merit. That's why we're running this comparative program. He turned to a map on the wall showing the Ridgewood training area. In 6 weeks, your teams will face off in a comprehensive field exercise. 3 days of simulated combat under realistic conditions. After the briefing, Hayes asked Tom to remain behind. When the room had cleared, he sank heavily into a chair, the facade of strength momentarily dropping. You look like hell, Bobby, Tom said quietly. Hayes managed a weak smile. Feel worse than I look. Chemo's a bitch. He straightened with visible effort. Your team. How are they really doing? Tom considered his answer. Coming together. Better than I expected after 1 week. They're starting to see the value in understanding the machine from the inside out. And Foster's approach? Has merit, Tom admitted. I'm not opposed to technology, Bobby. I just want tankers who can function when it fails. Hayes nodded. That's why I wanted you for this. Foster sees technology as the solution to human limitations. You see humans as the solution to technological limitations. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. He pulled a file from his briefcase. The latest intelligence on enemy anti-tank capabilities. Things have evolved since your day. Tom accepted the file, noting the classified markings. This is above my clearance level now. Special authorization for Project Iron Forge. You need to know what you're really preparing those officers to face. Hayes' expression grew grave. The next generation of threats makes the RPGs you faced in Iraq look like slingshots. Hypersonic anti-tank missiles, AI-driven swarm drones, battlefield EMP weapons that can fry every circuit within a kilometer radius. Jesus, Tom muttered, scanning the document. Does Foster have this information? He does. His solution is more technology, better countermeasures, faster systems. Hayes sighed. Maybe he's right, but I keep thinking about your story from Desert Storm, about restarting that engine under fire when all the fancy systems were fried. That's what I'm training them for, Tom said quietly. The worst-case scenario. Hayes nodded. The brass is leaning toward Foster's approach. Billions in development, contracts, political considerations. The whole mess. He locked eyes with Tom. You're the underdog here, my friend. But I've never known you to back down from a fight. The thunderstorm had rolled in unexpectedly, drenching the base in sheets of driving rain. Lightning illuminated the night sky in jagged bursts, followed by rumbling thunder that seemed to shake the foundations of the officers' quarters. Tom sat alone in his room, the classified intelligence briefing spread across his desk, illuminated by a single lamp. The contents were sobering. New Russian T-14 armadas with active protection systems capable of intercepting incoming rounds. Chinese anti-tank drones designed to target specific vulnerabilities in Western armor. Iranian electromagnetic pulse weapons that could disable electronic systems within a half-kilometer radius. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Lieutenant Reynolds stood in the hallway, her uniform damp from the rain. "Sir, I apologize for the late hour." "Come in, Lieutenant." Tom stepped aside, noting her troubled expression. "What's on your mind?" Reynolds entered. "I've been reviewing our progress on the tank rebuild, sir. At our current pace, we'll complete reassembly by Friday as planned. But that leaves only 3 weeks for tactical training before the field exercise." "Your point, Lieutenant?" "Major Foster's team will have 7 weeks of tactical training by then. We'll be at a significant disadvantage." Tom gestured for her to sit. "You're assuming our mechanical training isn't also tactical training." Reynolds remained standing. "Sir, what's the primary vulnerability of the Abrams targeting system?" Reynolds considered the question. "The external sensors can be damaged by enemy fire or obscured by environmental conditions. And if that happens, switch to backup sighting systems or manual control." "Could you have done that before this week?" Reynolds hesitated. "In theory, yes. In practice, I wouldn't have been as confident in the procedure." Tom nodded. "Everything we're doing is tactical training, Lieutenant. Just not in the way you're accustomed to thinking about it." Lightning flashed outside, briefly illuminating the room in stark white light. Thunder followed almost immediately. "There's something else," Reynolds said after a moment. "I spoke with Lieutenant Chen from Foster's team at dinner. They're testing a new AI battlefield management system. It processes terrain data, enemy positions, and friendly capabilities to generate optimal tactical solutions in real time." "Computers have been running tactical simulations for decades," Tom noted. "This is different, sir. It's adaptive, learning. Chen says it's already outperforming veteran commanders in complex scenarios." Tom studied Reynolds, seeing not just concern, but genuine uncertainty. "You're wondering if we're fighting a losing battle, if human judgment can compete with artificial intelligence." "Yes, sir." Reynolds finally sat down, her professional facade cracking slightly. "I want to believe in what we're doing, but the data is compelling." Tom considered his response carefully. "Lieutenant, have you ever had to make a life-or-death decision in combat?" "Yes, sir, in Fallujah. My platoon was pinned down by sniper fire. I had to decide whether to advance or retreat under fire." "What data did you base that decision on?" Reynolds frowned. "Incomplete information. Enemy position was uncertain. Civilian presence unknown. Multiple conflicting priorities." "And how did you decide?" "I trusted my gut, sir, based on experience, training, 100 factors I couldn't have articulated in the moment." Tom nodded. "That human intuition, formed through experience and empathy, is something AI cannot replicate. Computers process what we tell them is important. Humans perceive what is important, even when we can't define it." As she turned to leave, Tom stopped her with a question. "Lieutenant, why did you request transfer from Foster's team to mine?" "The truth this time." Reynolds met his gaze directly. "My father served in Desert Storm, sir, tank commander, 24th Mechanized Infantry Division." Tom felt a chill. "What was his name?" "Captain David Reynolds. He died when his tank was hit by friendly fire during a sandstorm. The targeting systems misidentified his position." Her voice remained steady, but her eyes held old pain. "Technology failed him, sir. I wanted to learn from someone who understands that technology is a tool, not a solution." The morning sun cast long shadows across the tank bay as Tom's team made final adjustments to their Abrams. After 5 days of intense work, the tank was nearly reassembled, its systems reconnected and tested. What had begun as a mechanical exercise had evolved into something more significant, a bonding experience that had transformed 5 individuals into the beginning of a cohesive unit. Washington emerged from the driver's compartment, wiping grease from his hands. "Engines responding correctly to all inputs, sir. Transmission engaging properly through all gears." Donnelly looked up from the main gun breech he was inspecting. "Turret rotation and gun elevation systems check out. Targeting computers interfacing with the sight assembly." "Communication systems are online," Patterson reported from his position at the commander's station. "Radio check with base operations confirmed. GPS receiving signal." Reynolds and Mendez approached it from where they had been testing the auxiliary systems. "Defensive countermeasures operational," Reynolds confirmed. "Smoke dispensers, laser warning receivers, all green." Tom nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Excellent work, people. Ahead of schedule and thorough. Tomorrow we'll take her out for a full systems check on the proving grounds. Before we secure for the day, Tom continued, I have something to show you. He moved to a nearby workbench where a covered object waited. Sergeant Donnelly, would you do the honors? Donnelly stepped forward and removed the covering, revealing a hand-painted emblem on a metal shield. The design showed a phoenix rising from flames, with the words Iron Resolve arcing above it. Every tank crew needs an identity, Tom explained, a symbol that represents who they are and what they stand for. This is ours. Washington grinned broadly. That's fine work, sir. Lieutenant Mendez designed it, Tom revealed. Sergeant Donnelly brought it to life. Mendez looked slightly embarrassed by the recognition. The phoenix represents resilience, adaptation, rising stronger from adversity. Exactly what we'll need at Ridgewood, Tom agreed. Tomorrow, after the systems check, we'll mount this on Valor's turret. Make it official. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of a young corporal. Captain Mitchell, sir, General Williams requests your presence in the command center immediately. The entire team is to attend. 20 minutes later, Tom led his team into the command center's main briefing room. They found General Williams in conversation with Colonel Hayes and Major Foster, whose team was also present. The atmosphere was tense, the expressions of the senior officers grave. Captain Mitchell, Williams acknowledged their arrival. Please be seated. We have a situation that affects Project Iron Forge. Williams activated the main display screen, revealing satellite imagery of a mountainous region. This is the Karabakh region, border area between Armenia and Azerbaijan. 3 hours ago, Azerbaijani forces launched a major offensive, employing their newly acquired T-90MS tanks alongside drone swarms and electronic warfare assets. He zoomed in on several areas of intense fighting. Armenian defensive positions have been overwhelmed. Their older tank formations are being decimated by a combination of drone strikes and precision artillery guided by AI targeting systems. Williams continued, Pentagon analysts are closely monitoring this conflict as it represents the first large-scale deployment of these combined arms tactics. The data coming in is concerning. Foster spoke up. General, how does this affect our program? Directly and immediately, Williams replied. The Joint Chiefs have requested accelerated findings from Project Iron Forge in light of these developments. They need tactical recommendations based on your respective training methodologies. Hayes took over. We're compressing the timeline. The Ridgewood field exercise will now take place in 2 weeks rather than 6. A murmur of surprise ran through both teams. Foster recovered first. Sir, with respect, my team is prepared to accelerate. Our simulation data already provides actionable insights. Noted, Major, Hayes acknowledged. Captain Mitchell? Tom felt all eyes turned to him. His team had spent their first week on mechanical systems rather than tactical training. On paper, they were significantly behind Foster's group, but paper didn't tell the whole story. My team will be ready, sir, Tom stated with quiet confidence. We'll adjust our training schedule accordingly. Williams studied both team leaders. This isn't just an academic exercise anymore, gentlemen. What you discover at Ridgewood may directly influence how we respond to this emerging threat paradigm. After the briefing concluded, Tom gathered his team in a side corridor. The shock was evident on their faces, particularly Patterson's. 2 weeks? Patterson voiced what they all were thinking. Sir, Foster's team has already run hundreds of tactical simulations. We've spent our time changing oil filters and learning every system of our tank inside and out, Tom countered. Knowledge they don't have. With respect, sir, Reynolds interjected, knowledge alone won't be enough. We need intensive tactical training to have any chance at Ridgewood. Tom nodded. And we'll get it, starting tomorrow, but not the way Foster's team is training. He looked each team member in the eye. They're running simulations based on known parameters. We'll be preparing for the unknown, for chaos, for when the plan falls apart. How exactly, Mendez asked. By training in degraded conditions, Tom explained. Limited visibility, compromised communications, system failures. The situations their simulations don't cover because they're too unpredictable. Washington nodded slowly. Fighting with one arm tied behind our back. Exactly, Tom confirmed, because in real combat, that's often what happens. He straightened. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we put Valor through her paces and then the real training begins. As the team dispersed, Hayes approached, having observed the exchange from a distance. Think they're up to it, Tom? Tom watched his team walking away, noting their concerned expressions and hushed conversations. They're good officers, Bobby, smart, dedicated, but they've never faced anything like what's waiting at Ridgewood. Neither has Foster's team, Hayes pointed out. The difference is, Foster believes his technology will provide all the answers. Tom shook his head. We know better. Hayes studied his old friend. 2 weeks isn't much time to prepare them for what you have in mind. No, Tom agreed, but it's what we've got. He turned to Hayes, seeing the increased pallor, the subtle signs of pain the colonel was hiding. How are you holding up? Good days and bad, Hayes admitted quietly. Today's manageable. The doctors want me to start another round of treatment next week, but I'm postponing until after Ridgewood. Need to see this through. We won't let you down, Bobby. Hayes clasped Tom's shoulder. I know. That's why I brought you here. He glanced toward the departing figures of Foster and his team. Foster's a good officer, brilliant actually, but he believes too much in his systems, in the infallibility of his technology. Your job is to shatter that illusion before it gets people killed. Tom nodded, understanding fully what Hayes was asking. Not just to compete with Foster's team, but to demonstrate the fundamental limitations of their approach. To prove that human judgment remained essential, even in an age of artificial intelligence and automated warfare. 2 weeks, Tom mused. Not much time to prepare for a revolution. Hayes managed a tired smile. Revolutions happen in an instant, my friend. It's the preparation that takes a lifetime. As Hayes departed, Tom remained in the corridor contemplating the challenge ahead. 2 weeks to transform his team into a cohesive fighting unit. 2 weeks to develop tactics that could counter the technological superiority of Foster's approach. 2 weeks to prove that the human element remained the decisive factor in modern warfare. The weight of the responsibility settled on his shoulders, familiar and heavy, not just for his team or for Hayes' legacy, but for the future tankers who would face these evolving threats on real battlefields, whose lives might depend on the lessons learned at Ridgewood. Tom straightened, decision made. They would be ready, whatever it took. The sun had barely crested the eastern ridgeline when the thunderous roar of Valor's engines shattered the morning stillness. Black exhaust billowed from the Abrams stacks as Tom guided the tank onto the proving grounds, the tank's treads churning mud in their wake. Inside the commander's cupola, Tom felt the familiar vibration through the soles of his boots, the mechanical heartbeat of 65 tons of American steel. The sensation never grew old, even after all these years. It was the feeling of controlled power, of technological might harnessed by human will, a perfect marriage of man and machine. Tom keyed his intercom. All stations report. Reynolds' voice came through with professional crispness from the gunner's position. Gunner ready. All targeting systems operational. Driver ready, Washington confirmed from below. Engine parameters normal. Transmission responsive. Loader ready, Donnelly reported. Main gun loaded with training round. TC ready, Tom acknowledged. Patterson Mendez, what's your status? In a departure from conventional crew configurations, Tom had positioned Patterson and Mendez in the observer seats he'd had installed behind the turret positions. Both officers wore headsets tied into the tank's intercom system. All systems monitoring software active, Patterson replied, recording performance metrics. Tactical displays online, Mendez added, ready to simulate battlefield scenarios. Tom nodded with satisfaction. After a week of rebuilding Valor piece by piece, the moment of truth had arrived. They'd completed reassembly yesterday, installed the Phoenix emblem on the turret, and now it was time to see if their handiwork would translate into battlefield performance. Washington, take us through Course Alpha, standard mobility test. Roger that, sir. The tank lurched forward, accelerating smoothly toward the first obstacle. Tom watched as Washington expertly guided the massive vehicle through the sequence of challenges. A steep incline, a water crossing, a series of concrete barriers requiring precise maneuvering. The Abrams performed flawlessly, its restored systems functioning as a harmonious whole. How's she handling, Washington? Tom asked. A note of pride entered Washington's voice. Like a dream, sir. Better than factory specs. Whoever assembled this transmission knew what they were doing. Tom smiled. You assembled that transmission, Sergeant. Yes, sir. That's why I'm not surprised it's perfect. From the cupola, Tom could see Foster's team gathered at the observation point, watching Valor's progress through the course. They stood in a tight cluster, tablets and notepads in hand, recording data, measuring, quantifying, ever the scientists. Tom keyed his intercom again. Reynolds, target acquisition test. Show me what our old girl can do. Roger. Reynolds' voice carried the focused edge of a professional at work. Thermal imaging engaged, acquiring targets. On the range ahead, a series of pop-up targets appeared at varying distances. Some were recognizable tank silhouettes. Others were civilian vehicles or innocent-looking structures. The test wasn't just about hitting targets, but about correctly identifying which ones to engage. Target 1, tank, 2,000 meters, Reynolds called. Firing. The Abrams rocked slightly as the main gun fired, the training round sailing downrange to strike the distant target dead center. Target 2, technical vehicle with mounted weapon, 1,500 meters. Firing. Another hit. Target 3, civilian truck, no weapon, holding fire. Tom nodded approvingly. Foster's AI might boast a 12% improvement in accuracy, but it couldn't match human judgment when it came to distinguishing legitimate targets from civilian objects that merely resembled threats. Reynolds continued through the course, demonstrating not just accuracy but discernment, the quality that separated a gunner from a mere triggerman. As the tank completed the final elements of the testing sequence, Tom permitted himself a moment of satisfaction. The rebuilt Abrams performed beyond expectations, its systems responding with the precision and reliability of a much newer vehicle. The team had done exceptional work, transforming a battle-scarred veteran into a formidable fighting machine once again. But the real test was yet to come. After completing the standard evaluation course, Tom directed Washington to drive Valor to a secluded section of the proving grounds, well away from the observation points where Foster's team watched. "Stop here," Tom ordered when they reached a small depression that shielded them from view. He turned to face his team in the confined space of the tank's interior. "Now begins the real training. Everything until now has been preparation." "For what exactly, sir?" Patterson asked. "For this." Tom reached forward and flipped a series of switches on the control panel. One by one, the tank's electronic systems went dark. The targeting computer, the thermal imaging, the GPS, the digital communications. Each system shutting down until only the most basic mechanical functions remained active. "What are you doing, sir?" Reynolds asked, alarm evident in her voice. "Creating failure conditions," Tom replied calmly. "From this moment forward, we train as if all advanced systems are compromised. We'll be fighting blind with only our eyes, our instincts, and our knowledge of this machine to guide us." He looked at each team member in turn. "That's what we'll face at Ridgewood. Foster's team will deploy every technological advantage, every digital system, every AI enhancement. And we're going to show what happens when those systems fail, when human judgment becomes the deciding factor." Washington grinned from the driver's seat. "Now we're talking, sir." Donnelly nodded with grim approval. Reynolds looked skeptical but determined. Patterson appeared both intrigued and nervous. Mendez studied the darkened displays with analytical intensity. "We have 2 weeks," Tom continued. 2 weeks to learn to fight when everything goes wrong, to make decisions without perfect information, to rely on each other instead of computers. He reached up and patted the steel ceiling of the turret. "Valor here is going to teach us how to survive when technology can't save us. The hard way, the only way that matters." Outside, the sun climbed higher in the morning sky, casting long shadows across the proving grounds. In the distance, Foster's team continued their observations, unaware that the real training was happening beyond their sight. The true preparation for the battle to come. The battle for the future of tank warfare itself. The next 10 days passed in a blur of intensified training. Tom drove his team relentlessly, pushing them beyond conventional limits into a realm of simulated catastrophe. Each day brought new challenges, new failures to overcome, new scenarios designed to strip away technological dependencies and force reliance on human skill and judgment. On day 3, Tom had them conduct target practice in complete electronic blackout. No thermal imaging, no laser rangefinder, no ballistic computer, just the naked eye, manual calculations, and instinct. Reynolds struggled at first, her accuracy plummeting from near perfect to barely acceptable. By the end of the day, however, she'd adapted, compensating for the lack of technology with heightened observation skills and intuitive adjustments. "Use your senses," Tom coached from behind her. "Listen to the wind, feel the vibration of the tank. Connect with your target on a level deeper than digital." "That's not in any training manual I've ever read, sir," Reynolds replied, frustration evident in her voice. "That's because it can't be taught from a manual," Tom said quietly. "It can only be learned through experience, through failure, through pushing past what seems possible." On day 5, they practiced emergency field repairs under simulated combat conditions. Tom had rigged Valor with a series of artificial failures that had to be diagnosed and repaired while under mock enemy fire. Washington excelled at these exercises, his mechanical intuition allowing him to identify problems almost instantly. He began teaching the others his methods, showing them shortcuts and workarounds that wouldn't be found in any technical manual. The manual says this repair takes 30 minutes, Washington explained as he bypassed a damaged electrical relay. But if you reroute through the secondary junction and cross these two wires, you can be back in action in under 5. Just don't tell the engineers I showed you this. They hate when we improvise. On day 7, they practiced communication drills with deliberate radio interference. Messages had to be conveyed through alternative means. Hand signals, light flashes, even old-fashioned flag semaphore that Donnelly had learned in his early military days. Patterson, initially skeptical of these archaic methods, soon developed an appreciation for their reliability in conditions where digital communications failed. The enemy can jam our radios, Tom explained. They can intercept our digital transmissions. They can deploy EMP weapons to fry our electronics. But they can't stop us from communicating if we're prepared with backup methods. Sir, Patterson ventured during a brief break, I've been thinking about countermeasures for these scenarios. Hardened communication systems, Faraday cage protections for sensitive electronics, redundant targeting computers with isolated power supplies. Tom nodded. Good thinking, Lieutenant. I'm not against technology. I'm against dependency on technology. Develop your countermeasures, but remember they're backups, not primary systems. The human element comes first. By day 9, the team had developed a rhythm, a synchronicity that transcended their individual roles. They began to anticipate each other's actions, to communicate with minimal words, to function as a cohesive unit rather than 5 separate specialists. The transformation was evident in subtle ways. The reduced time between commands and execution, the decreased need for clarification, the intuitive adjustments each made to accommodate the others. Throughout it all, Tom observed with growing satisfaction. The team was coming together exactly as he'd hoped, not just learning to function without technological crutches, but learning to thrive in their absence, learning that their greatest strength lay not in the systems they controlled, but in their connection to each other and to the machine they'd rebuilt with their own hands. On the 10th day, Tom decided it was time for the ultimate test. Tomorrow, he announced as they secured Valor for the evening, we conduct a full-scale combat simulation. The entire base training area will be our battlefield. Foster's team will serve as our opposition force. Will General Williams be observing? Reynolds asked. Yes, him and Colonel Hayes. This will be our dress rehearsal for Ridgewood. And the parameters, sir? Mendez inquired. Standard combat simulation rules. Laser target designators register as hits. First team to achieve mission objectives wins. Tom paused, meeting each of their gazes. But there's a twist. At exactly 0900 hours, all electronic systems on our tank will fail, permanently for the duration of the exercise. Patterson frowned. Does Foster's team know about this? No, and neither does General Williams. Only Colonel Hayes is aware of our plan. Sir, Reynolds said carefully, with respect, we'll be at a severe disadvantage. Foster's team will have full technological capability. We'll be effectively fighting blind. Tom smiled grimly. Precisely, Lieutenant. Just as we've been training to do. They'll slaughter us, Donnelly observed, but there was no fear in his voice. Only a veteran's assessment of the tactical situation. Perhaps, Tom acknowledged, but winning isn't the objective tomorrow. Demonstration is. We need to show Williams and the brass what happens in a real-world scenario when technology fails. And more importantly, we need to show that humans can adapt and overcome that failure. Washington grinned, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. In other words, sir, we're setting ourselves up to take a fall in order to prove a point. A calculated risk, Sergeant. One that could determine the future of tank warfare. Tom looked around at his team. Any objections? Now's the time to voice them. A moment of silence followed. Then Mendez spoke. It's tactically unsound, but strategically brilliant, sir. I'm in. Wouldn't miss it, Washington added. Someone needs to keep you all from getting too carried away, Donnelly said with a shrug. Patterson hesitated, then nodded. I still believe in technology, sir, but I'm beginning to see your point about over-reliance. I'll follow your lead. All eyes turned to Reynolds. She met Tom's gaze with steady resolve. My father would have approved of this approach, sir, so do I. Tom nodded, pride swelling in his chest. They had come so far in such a short time. from skeptics to believers, from individuals to a team. Tomorrow would test them as never before, but he had faith in what they'd become. "Get some rest," he ordered. "Tomorrow we make our stand." The simulated battle began at 0700 hours under a sky heavy with gray clouds. A light drizzle fell, turning the training ground's dirt into slick mud that clung to boots and made footing treacherous. Perfect conditions for demonstrating the limitations of technology in adverse environments. Tom stood in Valor's cupola, binoculars scanning the terrain ahead. The exercise boundaries encompass 5 square miles of varied terrain, from open fields to wooded areas, from shallow streams to steep ridgelines. Somewhere out there, Foster's team lurked in their advanced SEPV-3 Abrams, guided by AI tactical systems and enhanced sensors. "All stations report," Tom called, his voice calm despite the anticipation building in his chest. His team responded with professional precision, each confirming readiness. For now, all of Valor's systems functioned normally. The targeting computer displayed crisp imagery. The tactical display showed their position with GPS accuracy. The engine hummed with power beneath them. In less than 2 hours, all that would change. "Mission parameters are simple," Tom reminded them. "Capture and hold the high ground at Objective Delta for 30 minutes. Foster's team has the same objective. First to accomplish the mission wins." "And if neither team succeeds within the exercise time frame?" Mendez asked. "Then it's a draw," Tom replied. "But that's not going to happen. One way or another, this ends today." He checked his watch. 0705, time to move out. "Washington, advance to phase line Alpha. Standard tactical movement. Reynolds, maintain scan for hostile forces." "Roger that, sir." Valor lurched forward, its treads churning mud as it advanced through the morning mist. Tom kept his head on a swivel, scanning for any sign of Foster's team. The opposing force would be using every technological advantage: thermal imaging to cut through the fog, ground-penetrating radar to detect mines or obstacles, satellite imagery to track Valor's movements. For now, Tom's team had those same advantages. The question was whether they could maintain effectiveness once those systems went dark. They reached phase line Alpha without incident, a shallow creek that cut across the training ground. Washington navigated the water crossing smoothly, the Abrams' weight and power allowing it to push through the muddy creek bed without difficulty. "Movement, 2 o'clock, approximately 1,800 meters, Reynolds reported from the gunner's position. Thermal signature consistent with another Abrams. Tom swung his binoculars in that direction. Through the morning haze, he could just make out the distinctive silhouette of a tank moving along a distant ridgeline. Foster's team conducting their own reconnaissance. "They're taking the high road toward the objective," Mendez observed. "Classic maneuver. They'll have the tactical advantage if they reach Objective Delta first." "Then we don't let them reach it first," Tom replied. "Washington, cut across to Route Bravo. We'll use the lower ground for concealment, then make a rapid ascent just before the objective." "That's risky, sir," Patterson cautioned. "The lower route adds almost a kilometer to our approach." "Sometimes the longest way around is the shortest way home," Tonna quoted. "Foster will expect us to race for the high ground. We'll surprise him with patience." The tank changed direction, descending into a shallow valley that would shield them from direct observation. The terrain grew rougher, with fallen trees and rocky outcroppings forcing Washington to navigate carefully. Their progress slowed, but they remained hidden from enemy sensors. Tom checked his watch again. 0825. 35 minutes until their systems would go dark. They needed to close more distance before that happened. "Washington, increase speed. We need to reach phase line Charlie before 0900. "Roger that, sir. Hang on." The tank surged forward, its suspension absorbing the rough terrain as Washington pushed the engine harder. The interior filled with the increased roar of the turbine and the rattle of equipment as they bounced over obstacles. Reynolds maintained her scan for threats, her focus unwavering despite the jolting ride. At 0855, they reached phase line Charlie, a dense copse of trees that marked the final approach to Objective Delta. Through breaks in the foliage, Tom could see the objective itself, a prominent hill that dominated the surrounding terrain. There was no sign of Foster's team yet, but they had to be close. 5 minutes until blackout, Tom announced. Final systems check. Each crew member reported their status, confirming that all systems remained operational. Tom used these last precious minutes of technological advantage to study the objective through enhanced optics, memorizing the terrain features, the approach routes, the potential ambush positions. At precisely 08:59, Tom gave his final instructions. In 1 minute, we go dark. From that point forward, we rely on what we've trained for: manual targeting, visual identification, instinct, and experience. He paused, looking at each team member. Remember, this isn't just about today's exercise. This is about proving what humans can do when technology fails, about ensuring that the tanks of tomorrow don't forget the lessons of yesterday. Reynolds nodded from the gunner's position. We won't let you down, sir. I know you won't, Lieutenant. Tom checked his watch one last time. 30 seconds. The tension in the tank was palpable, a physical presence as real as the steel that surrounded them. Each crew member made final preparations, mentally shifting to the protocols they'd practiced during the past 10 days. 10 seconds. Tom reached for the master circuit breaker that would cut power to all non-essential systems. 3, 2, 1, execute. He pulled the lever. Instantly, the tank's interior dimmed as screens went dark. The targeting computer died. The thermal imaging system failed. The GPS display showed only static. The radio emitted a final burst of static before falling silent. Valor was now deaf, dumb, and blind by modern military standards. But it was still operational, still dangerous, still crewed by humans who had trained for exactly this moment. Status report, Tom ordered calmly. Manual targeting engaged, Reynolds replied. Optical sights functioning. Engine and drive systems operational, Washington confirmed. Main gun ready. Manual loading procedures in effect, Donnelly reported. All automated systems offline, Patterson added, reverting to analog backups. Tactical assessment unchanged, Mendez concluded. Objective Delta remains our primary goal. Tom nodded with satisfaction. No panic, no confusion, just professional adaptation to changed circumstances, exactly as they trained. Washington advanced to the objective, full speed. Reynolds maintained visual scan using optical sight only. Donnelly load high explosive round. Sir, Donnelly questioned. The training exercise used only laser designators, not actual ammunition. Simulation, Sergeant, but I want you going through the physical motions exactly as you would in combat. Roger that, sir. Valor burst from the tree line, accelerating toward Objective Delta with renewed purpose. Without GPS to guide them, Washington navigated by landmarks and terrain features, maintaining their course through pure skill and spatial awareness. Reynolds swept her optical sight across the landscape, searching for the enemy without the aid of thermal imaging or motion detection. They were halfway to the objective when the attack came. Contact right, Reynolds called. Enemy tank, 300 meters, partial defilade behind the rocky outcrop. Tom spotted it immediately. Foster's Abrams, its turret traversing toward them, its systems undoubtedly painting Valor with targeting solutions from multiple sensors. Evasive action, Tom ordered. Washington, use the depression at 10 o'clock for cover. The tank swerved sharply, just as a simulated shot from Foster's main gun registered on Valor's hit indicator. A near miss passing just over the turret. They've got us locked in their systems, Patterson reported. Laser targeting has us acquired. But they're still firing, Tom noted with grim satisfaction, which means they haven't actually hit us yet, despite their technological advantage. Washington guided the tank into the shallow depression, using it for momentary cover as they continued toward the objective. We need to blind them, Tom decided. Deploy smoke, continuous screen along our approach vector. Donnelly activated the smoke dispensers, which began pumping thick, white smoke behind the tank, obscuring their movement. It was an old tactic, dating back decades, but still effective against even the most advanced sensors under certain conditions. Reynolds, can you get a firing solution on their position? She squinted through the optical sight. Partial target acquisition, sir. I can see their turret, but the hull is concealed. Range approximately 350 meters now. Can you hit what you can see? Reynolds didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. Fire when ready. Without the ballistic computer to calculate trajectory, elevation, and wind correction, Reynolds had to rely on her training and instinct. She made subtle adjustments to the gun elevation and lead, compensating for Valor's movement in the environmental conditions. On target! Firing! The main gun roared, the tank rocking slightly with the recoil. Through his binoculars, Tom saw the simulated round impact just above Foster's turret position. Another near miss, but impressively close for a manual targeting solution. Adjust 2 mils down and fire again, Tom ordered. Reynolds made the correction with practiced precision. Firing! This time, the hit indicator registered a direct hit on Foster's tank. Under real combat conditions, such a hit might not have been catastrophic against modern armor, but in the exercise parameters, it counted as significant damage. Good hit, Tom called. Washington, continue to objective, full speed. Valor surged forward again, closing the distance to objective Delta. Foster's tank emerged from its position, pursuing despite the simulated damage. Their technological advantage allowed them to maintain precise targeting even through the smokescreen, and another hit registered on Valor's left side. They've scored a mobility kill on our port track, Patterson reported. Simulate the damage, Tom ordered. Washington, reduce speed to compensate for damaged track. The tank slowed perceptibly, now vulnerable as they made the final approach to the objective. Foster's tank continued to close the distance, scoring another hit on Valor's rear armor. Engine damage, Patterson called. Simulated power reduction to 60%. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Without their technological systems, Valor was at a severe disadvantage in a direct firefight. Foster's superior targeting and fire control systems allowed his team to score hit after hit while remaining relatively safe from return fire. Exactly the scenario Tom had anticipated. Exactly the lesson he wanted to demonstrate to General Williams and the observing officers. But Tom wasn't finished yet. Washington, make for the ravine at 11 o'clock. Sir, that's away from the objective. Do it. Washington complied, guiding the hobbled tank toward a narrow ravine that cut across the training ground. It was a natural feature that didn't appear on standard military maps, something Tom had noticed during his personal reconnaissance of the area days earlier. Foster's following, Mendez reported. He thinks he has us on the run. He does, Tom replied with a grim smile, right where I want him. The ravine dipped sharply, concealing Valor from direct fire temporarily. Tom immediately issued new orders. All stop. Reynolds, traverse turret to cover the ravine entrance. Donnelly, simulate loading armor-piercing round. The tank halted, its turret swinging around to face the way they had come. Tom's strategy became clear to the crew. They were setting an ambush, using the ravine as a natural trap. Foster will follow us in, Tom explained. His systems will tell him we're damaged and retreating. His AI will calculate that pursuing and finishing us is the optimal strategy before securing the objective. But his AI doesn't know this terrain like we do, doesn't understand that this ravine creates a perfect choke point. Within moments, Foster's tank appeared at the ravine entrance, advancing confidently in pursuit of what it perceived as a crippled enemy. Wait for it, Tom cautioned, as Reynolds acquired the target. Let him commit fully to the ravine. The opposing Abrams advanced deeper into the natural trap, its sensors no doubt still tracking Valor with precision. But sensors couldn't change the fundamental tactical reality. Foster had placed his tank in a vulnerable position with limited maneuver space and only one clear direction for retreat. Now, Tom ordered when Foster's tank reached the optimal position. On target, Reynolds confirmed. Firing! The simulated round struck Foster's tank directly on its frontal armor, registering as a critical hit. In a real engagement, such a shot might have penetrated even the advanced armor of a modern Abrams. Hit, Reynolds called with satisfaction. Again, Tom ordered, before they can reverse out of the ravine. Reynolds adjusted her aim slightly. Firing! A second hit registered, this one targeting the tank's track assembly. Foster's Abrams was now immobilized in the ravine, its technological superiority rendered irrelevant by the tactical situation. Washington, get us out of here. Use the eastern exit. Make for objective Delta immediately. The tank lurched into motion again, climbing out of the ravine through a narrow passage that Foster's larger, undamaged tank couldn't navigate with its disabled track. Within minutes, they had left the ambush site behind and were closing on the original objective. Status of Foster's tank, Tom asked. Patterson checked the simulation parameters. Immobilized with critical damage. They're effectively out of the fight for at least 15 minutes while they simulate emergency repairs. That gives us enough time to secure the objective, Mendez noted, even with our reduced speed. Tom nodded. The plan had worked perfectly, not because they had better technology or more advanced systems, but because they had anticipated the enemy's actions, used the terrain to their advantage, and executed a classic maneuver that dated back to the earliest days of warfare. The human element, transcending technological limitations. They reached objective Delta unopposed, securing the high ground with 10 minutes to spare before Foster's team could complete their simulated repairs. By the time the opposing tank finally approached, Valor was in a commanding defensive position, its main gun covering all possible approaches. Foster's tank halted at the base of the hill, recognizing the futility of assaulting an entrenched position. The exercise controllers called the scenario complete, with Tom's team having successfully achieved their mission objectives despite the deliberate handicap they'd imposed on themselves. As Tom emerged from the tank's cupola, he saw General Williams and Colonel Hayes approaching from the observation point. Hayes wore a satisfied smile beneath his cap, while Williams's expression remained carefully neutral. Foster climbed down from his own tank, his face a mixture of confusion and reluctant admiration as he joined the gathering officers. "Interesting tactics, Captain Mitchell," Williams remarked, "particularly the decision to disable your own electronic systems mid-exercise." "A simulation of battlefield conditions, sir," Tom replied. "Enemy electronic warfare capabilities continue to advance. We need to be prepared for worst-case scenarios." "And your ambush in the ravine?" "Basic tactics, sir. Terrain appreciation and predictive analysis of enemy behavior. Skills that don't require computers or AI." Williams studied Tom thoughtfully. "You deliberately handicapped your own team to prove a point." "I trained my team to function when technology fails, sir. Today was simply the demonstration of that training." Foster stepped forward. "With respect, General, Captain Mitchell's approach was unorthodox but effective for this specific scenario. However, it doesn't invalidate the advantages of our technological systems under normal operating conditions." "No one is suggesting it does, Major," Hayes interjected, his voice carrying the weight of authority despite his illness. "The point isn't that technology is useless. It's that over-reliance on technology creates catastrophic vulnerability." Williams looked from Hayes to Tom, then to Foster. "Both approaches have merit. That's why we're conducting the Ridgewood exercise, to evaluate the optimal balance between human judgment and technological enhancement." He turned to Tom. "Your team performed admirably today, Captain, particularly considering the self-imposed limitations. I'll be interested to see how they fare at Ridgewood under more comprehensive testing conditions." Tom nodded. "Thank you, sir. We'll be ready." As the officers dispersed, Hayes lingered behind, waiting until he and Tom were alone before speaking. "You made your point today," Hayes said quietly, dramatically. "Was it enough to sway Williams?" Hayes shrugged. "He's keeping his cards close. But you've planted the seed of doubt, made him question the assumption that more technology automatically means better results." "And Foster?" "Shaken, I think. He didn't expect to lose today, especially once your systems went dark." Hayes smiled faintly. "His after-action analysis will probably attribute the outcome to luck or terrain familiarity rather than acknowledging the fundamental lesson." Tom glanced back at Valor, where his team was conducting post-exercise maintenance checks. "They performed beyond my expectations, especially Reynolds." "She's coming around to your way of thinking," Hayes observed. "Not entirely, nor should she. The future isn't about rejecting technology, Bobby. It's about maintaining the proper relationship between human and machine. About understanding that technology should enhance human capability, not replace human judgment." Hayes nodded slowly. "A balance, then." "Always has been," Tom replied. "Always will be." The two veterans stood in silence for a moment, watching as the teams secured their vehicles. The clouds had begun to break, allowing shafts of sunlight to illuminate the training ground. In the distance, Tom could see General Williams in conversation with his staff, occasionally glancing in their direction. "Williams is under pressure from the Pentagon," Hayes said finally. "The Joint Chiefs want definitive recommendations after Ridgewood. The Azerbaijani offensive is accelerating the timeline for our own technological integration programs." "Politics," Tom muttered. "Reality," Hayes corrected. "War doesn't wait for us to resolve philosophical debates about man versus machine. The enemy is advancing now, developing new capabilities now. We need answers now." Tom understood the urgency. The classified briefing had made that clear. But rushing toward technological solutions without fully understanding their limitations was a recipe for disaster. "We'll give them answers at Ridgewood," Tom promised, "but they may not be the answers they're expecting." Hayes smiled thinly. "They rarely are." He glanced at his watch. "I have a treatment session at the medical center in an hour. Need to clean up first." Tom noticed the increased pallor in his friend's face, the subtle tremor in his hands that Hayes tried to hide. The cancer was progressing, the treatments taking their toll. Yet Hayes pushed on, driven by the same sense of duty that had defined his entire career. "How bad is it?" Tom asked quietly. Hayes met his gaze directly. "Bad enough, but I'll make it to Ridgewood. After that," he shrugged. "We'll see." Tom wanted to offer comfort, reassurance, hope. But they were soldiers, not sentimentalists. False optimism would be an insult to both of them. One day at a time, Tom said instead. One mission at a time, Hayes corrected with a ghost of his old smile. See you at the briefing tomorrow, 0800. Tom watched him walk away, noting the careful, measured steps of a man conserving his strength for the battles that mattered most. Hayes had always been the consummate soldier, putting mission before self, duty before comfort. Even now, facing his own mortality, he remained focused on securing the future of the force he had served his entire adult life. Tom turned back to Valor, where his team waited for instructions. They too had transcended themselves today, rising above their individual limitations to function as a cohesive unit. They had embraced Tom's philosophy not because he had ordered them to, but because he had shown them its value through practical demonstration. Foster's technological approach had failed today because it relied too heavily on systems that could be neutralized. Tom's human-centered approach had succeeded because it acknowledged those vulnerabilities and developed contingencies to overcome them, not rejecting technology, but refusing to be defined by it. The lesson of today's exercise was clear. But would it be enough to influence the outcome at Ridgewood, to shape the future direction of American armored warfare? Tom climbed back into Valor's cupola, feeling the familiar embrace of the machine he had come to know so intimately. In 1 week, they would face the ultimate test at Ridgewood Valley. Everything they had worked for, everything they had trained for, would be put to the challenge. And the stakes couldn't be higher. The morning of the Ridgewood exercise dawned clear and cold, the October air carrying the first hint of winter. A light frost covered the training area, transforming the landscape into a glittering tableau under the rising sun. Perfect conditions for thermal imaging and electronic sensors. Perfect conditions to test the limitations of those same technologies. Tom stood beside Valor, watching his team conduct final pre-combat checks with practiced efficiency. Each member knew their role, understood their responsibilities. More importantly, each understood the purpose behind the exercise. Not just to compete against Foster's team, but to demonstrate fundamental truths about the nature of modern warfare, about the enduring importance of the human element in an increasingly automated battlefield. Captain Mitchell. Tom turned to find Colonel Hayes approaching, accompanied by a civilian Tom didn't recognize. The man wore an expensive suit beneath a heavy overcoat, his demeanor suggesting someone accustomed to authority and deference. Colonel, Tom acknowledged, noting with concern the increased frailty in Hayes' appearance. The past week had taken a visible toll, the cancer advancing despite ongoing treatments. You're looking well. It was a polite fiction, one that Hayes acknowledged with a slight nod. Captain, this is Mr. Edward Thornton from the Department of Defense. He's here to observe the Ridgewood exercise personally. Tom shook the civilian's hand, noting the firm grip and evaluating gaze. Mr. Thornton, welcome to Fort Carson. Captain Mitchell, your reputation precedes you. Thornton's voice carried the cultured tones of an East Coast education and long familiarity with the corridors of power. Colonel Hayes speaks highly of your unconventional approach to tank warfare. Not unconventional, sir. Traditional. There's a difference. Thornton smiled thinly. Semantics, Captain. The point is that you represent a perspective that some in the Pentagon find challenging, a counterpoint to the prevailing enthusiasm for technological solutions. Tom glanced at Hayes, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Thornton was more than just an observer. He represented someone with significant influence over funding and policy decisions. Someone who could determine whether the future of American armored warfare leaned toward Foster's AI-centric approach or maintained a balance between technology and human judgment. The Pentagon asked for tactical recommendations based on our training methodologies, Tom said carefully. Today we'll demonstrate the strengths and limitations of both approaches under realistic conditions. Indeed, I'll be most interested in the results. Thornton surveyed the training area with the calculating gaze of someone assessing an investment opportunity. Nearly $7 billion has already been allocated to next-generation armored vehicle development. The question is whether that investment should prioritize autonomous systems or enhanced human interfaces. The subtext was clear. The outcome of today's exercise could influence billions in defense spending, could shape Army doctrine for decades to come. The stakes were even higher than Tom had realized. If you'll excuse me, Tom said, I need to complete my team's preparations. Of course, Captain. Good luck today. Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes, although I suspect you don't believe in luck. Not the kind that matters, sir. As Tom returned to his team, Hayes fell into step beside him. Thornton reports directly to the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment, he said quietly. His presence here indicates how closely the Pentagon is monitoring this program. Politics, Tom muttered. Inevitable, Hayes countered. This isn't just about training methodologies anymore, Tom. It's about the future of American military power. About how we fight the next war. Tom nodded grimly. He had understood the significance of the Iron Forge program from the beginning, but Thornton's presence elevated it to an entirely new level. Today's exercise would have implications far beyond Fort Carson, beyond even the armor branch itself. No pressure, he said with grim humor. Hayes managed a wan smile. Just do what you do best, Tom. Show them what humans can accomplish when pushed to their limits. When technology fails and only courage, skill, and judgment remain. Tom clasped his old friend's shoulder, feeling the bones beneath the uniform, the fragility that Hayes worked so hard to conceal. For you, Bobby, one last mission, together. Hayes nodded, emotion briefly visible in his eyes before he mastered it. One last mission. The exercise controllers called for all participants to man their vehicles. Tom rejoined his team, finding them already prepared, awaiting his final instructions. This is it, he said simply. Everything we've trained for, everything we've prepared for. Today we demonstrate not just what we can do, but why it matters. Reynolds checked her gunner's sight one last time. Rules of engagement, sir. Standard exercise parameters. Laser designation registers as hits. Damage assessment by the control team. Multiple objective phases. Evolving tactical situation. Tom paused, making eye contact with each team member. But our mission goes beyond the formal parameters. We're demonstrating what happens when technology fails, when human judgment becomes the decisive factor. Do we initiate electronic failure like last time? Patterson asked. Tom shook his head. No, today we operate normally unless circumstances dictate otherwise. The exercise controllers have built-in surprise elements that will test both teams under varying conditions. Washington grinned from the driver's hatch. In other words, they're going to throw monkey wrenches into everybody's plans. Precisely, Sergeant. And our job is to adapt faster and more effectively than Foster's team. Tom checked his watch. Mount up. Exercise begins in 15 minutes. As the team took their positions in Valor, Tom climbed into the commander's cupola, surveying the expansive training area that would serve as their battlefield for the next 3 days. Ridgewood Valley stretched before them, its varied terrain offering challenges and opportunities in equal measure. Somewhere on the other side, Foster's team was making their own final preparations, confident in their technological superiority. The radio crackled with the exercise controller's voice. All units, this is Control. Exercise Iron Forge will commence in 5 minutes. Confirm readiness status. Tom keyed his microphone. Team Valor confirms ready status. Foster's acknowledgement followed moments later. Exercise parameters are as follows, the controller continued. Phase 1, reconnaissance and terrain familiarization. Duration 4 hours. Phase 2, offensive operations against fixed defensive positions. Duration 6 hours. Phase 3, force-on-force engagement culminating in capture of strategic objectives. Duration 14 hours. Standard exercise structure, but Tom knew from experience that the controllers would introduce complications and unexpected elements throughout. That was where the true test would lie. Not in executing predetermined plans, but in adapting to unforeseen challenges. Exercise commences on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. Tom keyed his intercom. Washington, move out. Standard reconnaissance pattern alpha. Reynolds, maintain visual scan for opposing forces or exercise markers. Valor lurched forward, its massive weight shifting as the engine roared to life. The first phase had begun. The battle for the future of tank warfare was underway. And Tom Mitchell, veteran of Desert Storm, survivor of Iraq, teacher of a new generation, was exactly where he belonged. In command, in control. Ready to prove once more that in the crucible of combat, the human element remains supreme. Whatever Ridgewood might bring, he and his team would face it together, would adapt, would overcome. Iron resolve against the storm. The first day of the Ridgewood exercise unfolded like a chess match, played across 5 square miles of rugged terrain. Tom guided Valor through the reconnaissance phase with methodical precision, mapping key terrain features, identifying potential ambush positions, analyzing avenues of approach. His team functioned with the synchronized efficiency of seasoned professionals, each member anticipating the other's needs without unnecessary communication. By mid-afternoon, they had compiled a comprehensive tactical assessment of the battlefield, focusing particularly on areas where the terrain might neutralize Foster's technological advantages. Narrow defiles where sensors would be constrained, dense woodland where thermal signatures would be obscured, ridgelines that could shield them from electronic detection until the critical moment of engagement. Foster's team is focusing on the northern quadrant, Mendez reported after analyzing their limited intelligence. They've conducted multiple sensor sweeps of the high ground above Checkpoint Charlie. Logical, Tom replied. The elevation provides optimal conditions for their advanced targeting systems, maximum range, clear fields of fire. So we avoid that area? Patterson asked. Tom smiled thinly. On the contrary, Lieutenant, that's precisely where we'll engage them. Just not on their terms. As dusk approached, the exercise controllers announced the transition to Phase 2, offensive operations against fixed defensive positions. Simulated enemy bunkers and artillery emplacements had been established throughout the valley, presenting both teams with multiple tactical problems to solve. Primary objective is Bunker Complex Alpha, Tom announced, studying the mission parameters. Secondary objectives include Artillery Position Bravo and Command Post Charlie. Reynolds examined the intelligence overlay. Foster's team is closer to the primary objective. They'll reach it before we can. Let them, Tom replied, surprising his team. We'll focus on the secondary objectives first. Sir, Washington questioned from the driver's position. The exercise scoring weights the primary objective more heavily. True, but success isn't measured only in points, Sergeant. Tom traced a route on the tactical map. Foster will hit Bunker Alpha with everything he has, leveraging his technological advantage for a quick victory. But technology consumes resources, power, fuel, computing cycles. By the time he secures the primary objective, his systems will need recalibration and his fuel reserves will be depleted. Understanding dawned in Mendez's eyes. We'll be at peak operational capacity when Foster is most vulnerable. Exactly. We'll secure the secondary objectives efficiently, then hit the primary when Foster is least prepared to defend it. Tom checked his watch. We have 6 hours for this phase. Let's make them count. The strategy unfolded precisely as Tom had anticipated. Foster's team moved aggressively against Bunker Complex Alpha, using their advanced sensors and targeting systems to devastating effect. Within 2 hours, they had secured the primary objective, earning maximum points for that phase of the exercise. Meanwhile, Tom's team methodically reduced Artillery Position Bravo and Command Post Charlie, using terrain masking and indirect approaches to minimize exposure. They completed both objectives with minimal simulated casualties and optimal ammunition expenditure. As night fell across Ridgewood Valley, the exercise controllers announced a 4-hour operational pause. Both teams were directed to establish defensive positions and conduct maintenance before the final phase began at dawn. Tom used this opportunity to gather his team outside Valor, the tank's massive silhouette looming behind them in the darkness. The night air was crisp with approaching winter, their breath forming clouds in the cold. Phase 3 begins at 0600, Tom informed them. Force-on-force engagement culminating in capture of 3 strategic objectives. He pointed to locations marked on the tactical map spread before them. Ridge 101, Hill 205, and Crossroads 37. Control of 2 out of 3 objectives constitutes victory, Mendez noted, studying the parameters. Correct, and Foster will move to secure Ridge 101 and Hill 205 first. They're the high ground positions that maximize his technological advantage. So we go for Crossroads 37, Reynolds asked. Tom shook his head. No, we're going to take all 3 objectives. Patterson looked skeptical. Sir, with respect, Foster's team still has superior firepower and targeting capability, even with their resources partially depleted from Phase 2. True, but they have a critical vulnerability we don't. Tom paused, ensuring he had everyone's attention. They depend on their technology. We don't. He knelt beside the map, indicating a feature that hadn't been part of the official exercise briefing. During reconnaissance, I identified this terrain depression half a kilometer east of Ridge 101. It's not on the standard topographical maps because it's a recent feature created by last spring's flooding. The exercise controllers don't even have it in their databases yet. A blind spot, Donnelly observed with appreciation. Exactly, Sergeant. A location where we can position without being detected by satellite imagery or long-range sensors. Tom traced a route with his finger. We'll move into position during the operational pause, maintaining complete emissions control. No active sensors, no radio traffic. Won't that violate exercise protocols? Patterson asked, concerned. Not at all. The operational pause restricts engagement, not movement. It's a subtle distinction, but a critical one. Tom continued outlining his plan. At 0600, when Phase 3 officially begins, Foster will move to secure the high ground objectives with his main force. We'll be in position to strike at his vulnerable flank precisely when his attention is focused elsewhere. The team studied the plan in silence, each mentally working through the tactical implications. It was audacious, unconventional, exactly the approach that technological systems would struggle to anticipate. Questions, Tom asked finally. What if Foster detects our movement during the operational pause? Reynolds voiced the obvious concern. Then we adapt, Tom replied simply, as humans do. Washington grinned. Just like old times in Iraq, sir, making it up as we go. Improvisation based on training and experience, Sergeant. There's a difference. Tom folded the map. Maintenance checks and rest rotation, we move at 0200. As the team dispersed to their tasks, Hayes approached from the exercise command post, his gait slow but determined. Even in the darkness, Tom could see the increased pallor in his friend's face, the way he carried himself with careful control to mask his pain. Your team performed well in the first phases, Hayes said without preamble. Thornton was impressed with your methodical approach to the secondary objectives. And Foster? Scored higher on points but expended significant resources securing the primary objective, as you predicted. Hayes studied Tom with knowing eyes. You're playing the long game. War isn't about winning individual engagements. It's about winning the final one. Hayes nodded. Thornton has been reviewing the preliminary data from both teams. He's particularly interested in the resource consumption metrics. Foster's systems require substantially more power and computational resources to maintain their advantage, Tom observed. In a protracted engagement, that becomes a critical vulnerability. A point not lost on the Pentagon observers. Hayes glanced toward the distant lights of the command post. General Williams is receiving pressure from both sides. The technological advocates want confirmation of their approach. The traditionalists want validation of the human element. And you, Bobby, what do you want from this exercise? Hayes was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. Balance, he said finally. Recognition that the future isn't about man versus machine, but about the optimal integration of both. About understanding when to trust the computer and when to trust human judgment. Tom nodded. It was the same conclusion he had reached through his decades of service. Not rejection of technology, but recognition of its proper place in the chain of command. As a tool, not a replacement, for human decision-making. Get some rest, Hayes advised. Tomorrow we'll test everything you've taught your team. Tom watched his friend walk back toward the command post, his silhouette growing dimmer in the darkness. Hayes was fighting his own private battle against the cancer consuming him from within, yet still focused on securing the future of the force he had served his entire life. The epitome of what Tom had been trying to instill in his team. Dedication that transcended personal concerns, commitment to principles larger than oneself. At precisely 0200 hours, Valor began its stealthy movement toward the hidden depression Tom had identified during a reconnaissance. Washington guided the massive tank with delicate precision, maintaining minimum speed to reduce noise and thermal signature. The rest of the team remained vigilant, monitoring for any sign that Foster's sensors had detected their unauthorized advance. They reached the concealed position by 0330, nestling the 65-ton vehicle into the natural depression with its turret just below the surrounding terrain level. From this position, they could observe Ridge 101 without exposing themselves to detection from the high ground. Complete emissions control, Tom ordered as they settled into position. Passive sensors only, no active radar or thermal scanning. The hours passed in tense silence, the team rotating through rest cycles while maintaining constant visual observation. Tom allowed himself only brief periods of shallow sleep, his veteran's instincts keeping him alert despite the exhaustion of continuous operations. At 0530, 30 minutes before the official start of Phase 3, Tom gathered his team for final instructions. Foster will move at exactly 0600, splitting his force to secure Ridge 101 and Hill 205 simultaneously. Tom's voice was low but clear in the pre-dawn darkness. We'll allow his main element to pass our position, then strike at his vulnerable rear echelon. Once we've disrupted his support elements, we'll proceed to Crossroads 37 and establish a defensive position that can interdict movement between the other two objectives. Reynolds studied the tactical display with professional assessment. "We'll be outnumbered and outgunned, sir." "Temporarily," Tom acknowledged. "But Foster will be forced to divide his attention between holding the objectives he's secured and responding to our threat. That division of focus is where we'll find our advantage." "The human factor," Mendez observed with growing understanding. "Foster's AI will calculate optimal responses based on program parameters, but it won't anticipate the psychological impact of our maneuver." "Precisely, Lieutenant. We're not just attacking his force. We're attacking his confidence in his systems." As the eastern sky lightened with approaching dawn, the team completed final preparations. Ammunition was checked, systems verified, contingency plans reviewed. At precisely 0600, the exercise controllers announced the commencement of Phase 3. "All elements, this is Control. Force-on-force engagement now authorized. Objective parameters remain in effect until exercise conclusion at 2000 hours." Moments later, Foster's Abrams tanks emerged from their nighttime positions, moving with coordinated precision toward Ridge 101 and Hill 205. Tom watched through binoculars as the technologically superior force divided exactly as predicted, confident in their ability to secure both high-ground objectives before Tom's team could effectively respond. "Wait for it," Tom cautioned, as Foster's main elements passed their concealed position. "We need their rear echelon support vehicles to commit fully." The minutes stretched with excruciating slowness. Foster's tanks reached their initial positions near the objectives, establishing firing positions with optimal fields of view. Behind them, the support vehicles, ammunition carriers, fuel trucks, maintenance vehicles, moved forward to establish their logistics base. "Now," Tom ordered when the moment was perfect. "Washington, full speed. Reynolds, target the lead support vehicle, disabling shots only." Valor roared to life, surging from its concealed position with the sudden fury of a predator ambushing its prey. The tank crested the gentle rise that had hidden it from view, its main gun already traversing toward the vulnerable support column. The surprise was total. Foster's rear echelon had no combat vehicles providing security, their defensive plan relying on the early warning from advanced sensors that should have detected any approaching threat long before it reached effective engagement range. Sensors that had failed to detect Valor's presence due to the natural terrain feature Tom had identified. Reynolds fired 3 rapid shots in succession, each striking its target with devastating accuracy. 3 support vehicles were immediately disabled, according to exercise parameters, their critical supplies now unavailable to Foster's combat elements. Continuing to Phase 2, Tom announced as Washington guided Valor along the planned route toward Crossroads 37. "Maintain maximum speed. We need to establish our blocking position before Foster can reorganize." Foster's reaction was predictably swift but fragmented. One tank detached from Ridge 101, racing to intercept Valor before it could reach Crossroads 37. The rest maintained their positions on the objectives, unwilling to surrender the high ground they had secured. "Contact, one tank pursuing from our 6, Mendez reported. "Range 2,000 meters and closing." "Ignore him," Tom ordered. "He can't catch us before we reach the crossroads. Focus on the objective." Valor continued its advance, absorbing several simulated hits from long-range fire that registered as minor damage under exercise parameters. Tom accepted these hits as the necessary cost of executing his strategy, knowing that the exercise wasn't about avoiding all damage, but about accomplishing objectives despite taking casualties. They reached Crossroads 37 with 12 minutes to spare, immediately establishing a hasty defensive position that controlled the vital intersection linking all 3 objectives. From this position, they could effectively isolate Foster's forces, preventing mutual support between the separated elements. "Foster's command tank is moving," Patterson reported, monitoring the limited tactical data they allowed themselves. "Leaving Hill 205, advancing toward our position with 2 supporting elements." Tom nodded with satisfaction. Just as expected, he's realized the strategic importance of the crossroads. "Reynolds, prepare for multiple targets." "Ready, sir." The confrontation that followed was brief but intense. Foster's tanks approached with technological confidence, their advanced systems providing perfect targeting solutions despite the morning mist that had settled over the valley. But Tom had positioned Valor with veterans' cunning, using natural cover and concealment to maximum advantage. Reynolds fired first, scoring a critical hit on Foster's lead tank that registered as a mobility kill in the exercise parameters. The disabled vehicle now blocked the narrow approach, forcing the others to maneuver around it and disrupting their coordinated advance. "They're splitting up," Mendez observed. "One tank circling north, one south. Classic pincer movement." "Predictable," Tom replied. Washington reversed 5 meters. Reynolds traversed turret to target the northern element first. The maneuver placed Valor in a depression that provided hull protection while maintaining the turret's firing capability. Reynolds engaged the northern tank as it appeared over a small rise, scoring 2 rapid hits before it could effectively return fire. The southern element, now isolated, hesitated momentarily, a hesitation that proved fatal as Donnelly loaded another round and Reynolds shifted her aim. "3 tanks neutralized," Mendez confirmed as the exercise controllers updated the simulation parameters. "Foster still holds Ridge 101 and Hill 205, but with reduced forces, and we control their access to resupply." Tom checked the tactical display. "Foster has a decision to make. Maintain divided forces on both objectives, or consolidate to retake the crossroads." "What will he choose?" Patterson asked. "If he relies on his AI tactical system, it will recommend consolidation to retake the crossroads, the logical choice based on supply requirements." Tom studied the terrain with experienced eyes. "But if Foster thinks like a human commander, he'll recognize that holding the high ground still gives him a significant advantage if he can stretch his supplies until the exercise conclusion." The answer came 30 minutes later. Foster's remaining tanks began a coordinated movement, abandoning Hill 205 to reinforce Ridge 101. A classic consolidation of forces, exactly as Tom had predicted the AI would recommend. "They're giving us Hill 205, Reynolds observed with surprise. "They're giving us an opportunity," Tom corrected. "Washington, get us moving. We're going to capture Hill 205, then use it as a base to assault Ridge 101. "Taking all 3 objectives?" Washington asked with a grin. "That's the plan, Sergeant." The tanks surged forward again, racing toward the now undefended Hill 205. They secured it without resistance, immediately establishing firing positions oriented toward Ridge 101, where Foster had consolidated his remaining forces. 2 hours until exercise conclusion, Mendez noted, checking the time. "Foster holds 1 objective. We hold 2. We've already secured a technical victory." "This isn't about winning on points," Tom replied. "It's about demonstrating a principle, about showing what happens when human ingenuity confronts technological superiority." From their position on Hill 205, Tom could see Foster's remaining tanks entrenched on Ridge 101, their advanced targeting systems covering all conventional approaches. A frontal assault would be suicidal, even in exercise parameters. But Tom had no intention of attacking conventionally. "Patterson," he called to the communications officer, "I want you to initiate a focused electronic attack on Foster's position. Use the jamming protocols we practiced last week." Patterson's eyes widened. "Sir, that would violate exercise parameters. Electronic warfare wasn't part of the authorized—" "Check paragraph 7, subsection C of the exercise directives, Lieutenant. Participants may employ any tactical capability organic to their unit that does not require external authorization. Our communication suite includes basic jamming capability. It's authorized." Patterson verified the directive, then nodded with growing appreciation for Tom's thoroughness. "You planned this from the beginning." "I anticipated the possibility," Tom corrected. "Planning requires certainty. War rarely provides it." The electronic attack began 5 minutes later, directed at the frequencies Foster's systems use for inter-vehicle data sharing. Not powerful enough to completely disable their communications, but sufficient to introduce errors and latency into their targeting coordination. "Now," Tom ordered as the jamming took effect. "Washington, maximum speed, approach vector, Charlie." Valor lunged forward once more, this time taking a winding path through a shallow ravine that provided concealment for most of their approach to Ridge 101. Foster's tanks, their network targeting systems degraded by the electronic interference, struggled to establish a coordinated firing solution on the rapidly moving target. The final assault on Ridge 101 was a textbook demonstration of combined arms tactics executed by a crew functioning in perfect harmony. Washington maneuvered with aggressive precision, using every fold in the terrain for momentary concealment. Reynolds fired on the move, her manual adjustments compensating for the tank's motion with veteran skill. Donnelly loaded with mechanical efficiency, anticipating Reynolds' needs without verbal communication. Foster's tanks managed several hits on Valor during the assault, registered as moderate damage in the simulation, but Tom's team pressed forward regardless, closing to optimal engagement range before executing a perfectly timed flanking maneuver that caught Foster's remaining vehicles in a vulnerable crossfire. The exercise controller's announcement came with 23 minutes remaining in the scheduled timeframe. All forces, this is control. Team Valor has secured Objective Ridge 101. Exercise parameters satisfied. All units stand down and return to base camp for debriefing. Inside Valor's turret, the team exchanged glances of quiet satisfaction. They had accomplished the impossible, securing all three objectives against a technologically superior opponent, demonstrating beyond question the value of human judgment, experience, and adaptability in modern warfare. As they guided the tank back toward the assembly area, Tom allowed himself a moment of reflection. The victory today wasn't his alone. It belonged to his team, who had embraced his philosophy and executed it with professional excellence. It belonged to Hayes, who had given Tom this opportunity despite institutional resistance. And in a larger sense, it belonged to every soldier who had ever relied on human courage and judgment when technology failed. The debriefing took place in a large tent erected near the exercise command post. Both teams were present, along with General Williams, Colonel Hayes, and the Pentagon observer, Thornton. Maps and tactical displays showed the progression of the exercise, highlighting key decision points and their outcomes. Foster's team sat on one side of the tent, their expressions a mixture of professional respect and lingering frustration. They had performed exactly as their training and technology had prepared them to. They had lost not because of any failure on their part, but because they had encountered an opponent who refused to fight according to conventional expectations. The exercise results are clear, General Williams began addressing the assembled officers. Team Valor secured all three objectives, demonstrating exceptional tactical flexibility and resource management. He nodded toward Tom and his team. Captain Mitchell's unconventional approach proved highly effective against superior technology. Foster stood, receiving permission to speak. Sir, with respect, I believe the exercise parameters fail to account for real-world conditions. Captain Mitchell's team employed tactics that would be unsustainable in actual combat against peer adversaries with comparable technological capabilities. Thornton leaned forward with interest. Elaborate, Major. Sir, Team Valor accepted damage levels that would have resulted in catastrophic casualties in real combat. They prioritize offensive action over force protection in a manner that is inconsistent with established doctrine. Tom remained calm, waiting for his opportunity to respond. It came when Williams turned to him. Captain Mitchell, your rebuttal? Major Foster is partially correct, Tom began, surprising many in the room. We did accept damage that would have resulted in casualties in real combat. But war has always involved calculating acceptable losses against strategic gains. What Foster's analysis misses is the psychological dimension of combat. Tom moved to the central map, indicating the key positions. When we struck Foster's rear echelon and secured Crossroads 37, we created a situation his AI tactical system wasn't programmed to evaluate properly. The logical response was to consolidate forces and retake the crossroads. But the human response might have been different, might have recognized that maintaining divided forces on the high ground could have stretched supplies just long enough to reach exercise conclusion with two objectives secured. Foster frowned. You're suggesting I should have ignored the optimal tactical solution provided by our systems? I'm suggesting that in war, the optimal solution isn't always the one that maximizes short-term tactical advantage. Sometimes it's the one that creates psychological pressure the enemy can't effectively counter. Tom turned to face the entire room. Our approach wasn't about rejecting technology, it was about understanding its limitations, about recognizing that the human element, judgment, intuition, psychological insight, remains essential even as our weapons become more advanced. Hayes spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of command experience. The lesson of Ridgewood isn't that technology is unnecessary, it's that technology must enhance human capability rather than replace human judgment. Both teams performed admirably within their operational parameters. Both demonstrated strengths and vulnerabilities. Thornton studied the tactical displays thoughtfully. The Pentagon's interest is in developing optimal force structure for future conflicts. Captain Mitchell's team has demonstrated the continued relevance of human factors in combat operations, particularly when technology is degraded or countered. Major Foster's team has shown the force multiplication potential of advanced systems under favorable conditions. He turned to General Williams. I believe the Iron Forge program has provided exactly the data we needed to inform next-generation armored vehicle development. Williams nodded. And what conclusions do you draw from that data, Mr. Thornton? That the future lies not in choosing between Captain Mitchell's human-centered approach or Major Foster's technological focus, but in developing systems that leverage the strengths of both, that recognize the appropriate role of AI as an advisor to human judgment, not a replacement for it. The very conclusion Hayes had been advocating from the beginning, the balance between human and machine that respected the unique capabilities of each. As the debriefing concluded, Tom found Hayes waiting near the exit, his expression one of quiet satisfaction, despite the evident toll the day had taken on his health. You proved your point, Hayes said, convincingly. We proved it, Tom corrected. This was your vision, Bobby, your legacy. Hayes smiled faintly. One small victory in a larger war. The technological enthusiasts won't surrender their position based on a single exercise. But we've given them something to think about, shown them what happens when their perfect systems encounter imperfect reality. Tom nodded, understanding the truth in Hayes' words. Today's demonstration wouldn't end the debate about the future of tank warfare, but it had ensured that the human element wouldn't be forgotten in that future, that the balance Hayes had fought for would at least be considered as the Army developed its next generation of armored vehicles. What happens now? Tom asked. Now, Thornton returns to the Pentagon with his report. Williams submits his recommendations for future training protocols. And you, Hayes studied his old friend with knowing eyes. You have a decision to make. About? Your future. Williams mentioned the possibility of a permanent position here, developing a comprehensive training program based on the Iron Forge experience. Tom hadn't considered his next steps beyond the Ridgewood exercise. His focus had been entirely on proving the principles he believed in, on securing Hayes' legacy, on ensuring that future tank commanders would understand the proper relationship between human and machine. I need to think about it, he said finally. Hayes nodded. Take your time, but not too much time. He glanced down at his hands, the tremor more pronounced now that the day's events were concluding. Some of us have less of it than others. 3 days later, Tom stood beside Hayes' hospital bed, watching as his old friend drifted in and out of consciousness. The cancer had accelerated its progression, the doctors now measuring Hayes' remaining time in weeks rather than months. The Ridgewood exercise had demanded his last reserves of strength, but Hayes had insisted on seeing it through to completion. They've approved the program, Tom said quietly during a period of lucidity. Full funding for a comprehensive training curriculum based on Iron Forge. Emphasis on maintaining human judgment as the final authority in automated systems. Hayes' eyes, sunken now in his pale face, brightened with satisfaction. Your team? All staying on as instructors. Even Patterson has come around to our way of thinking, not rejecting technology, but understanding its proper place in the chain of command. And you? Hayes' voice was barely above a whisper. I've accepted Williams' offer, full colonel's rank, director of the new program. Tom smiled faintly. Seems this old dinosaur still has some life in him yet. Hayes managed a weak chuckle. Told you, magnificent, battle-tested dinosaur, exactly what the next generation needs. They sat in companionable silence for a time. Two veterans who had shared the crucible of combat and emerged with deeper understanding of its timeless truths. Outside the hospital window, the Colorado afternoon sun cast long shadows across the mountains, the eternal landscape unchanging despite the human dramas enacted upon it. Did I ever tell you, Hayes said suddenly, his voice stronger for a moment, about the time in Kuwait when my tank lost all power in the middle of a sandstorm? Tom shook his head, recognizing the gift Hayes was offering. One more story, one more lesson drawn from experience, one more thread in the tapestry of wisdom that veterans had always passed to their successors. We were completely blind, Hayes continued. No radio, no GPS, no targeting systems, just 4 men in a metal box in the middle of nowhere. His eyes took on a distant look, seeing across the decades to that moment of crisis. My gunner was ready to abandon vehicle. My loader was praying. But my driver, this calm old sergeant from Tennessee, just smiled and said, "Don't worry, sir, I've been lost before." Hayes paused, gathering strength. He climbed out into that sandstorm, came back 10 minutes later, covered head to toe in dust. said he'd found our position by the feel of the ground beneath his boots, by the way the wind hit his face, by instincts no computer could possibly simulate. Tom nodded, understanding the message beneath the story, the eternal truth that Hayes had spent his final days ensuring would not be forgotten. That driver got us back to our unit without any technology at all, just human judgment and experience. Hayes's voice faded as fatigue overtook him again. That's what you have to teach them, Tom. That when everything else fails, they'll still have that, the human element, the thing that can't be programmed or replaced. I will, Tom promised. They'll understand what matters most when the chips are down. Hayes's eyes closed, his breathing settling into the rhythm of sleep. Tom remained at his side, standing the watch as he had done so many times in so many places throughout his long career, guarding not just his friend, but the wisdom they had both earned through decades of service, the understanding that would guide the next generation of warriors as they faced the evolving challenges of modern warfare. Outside, the sun began to set behind the mountains, casting the hospital room in deepening shadows. But Tom remained, his resolve as strong as the steel that had carried him through countless battles. Iron resolve, forged in the fires of experience, tempered by the wisdom of age. The strength that came not from technology, but from the indomitable human spirit that no machine could ever truly replace. The strength that would endure long after both he and Hayes had passed from the scene. The legacy they would leave for those who followed. A legacy of balance, of wisdom, of understanding the eternal truths beneath the changing face of war. The human element, forever essential, forever irreplaceable. Forever the deciding factor when everything else fails.